In the barren expanses of the Arabian Peninsula, where the relentless sun scorched the endless sands and jagged mountains rose like silent sentinels over the desolate plains, a civilization teetered on the edge of chaos, its people bound by tribal loyalty yet divided by greed, ignorance, and superstition. This was Arabia over 15 centuries ago, a land rich in trade yet impoverished in moral compass, where the tribes of the desert, the Quraysh of Mecca, the Banu Hashim, the Banu Umayyah, and countless others wove intricate webs of alliances and rivalries, where honor was measured in bloodshed and vengeance, and where the weak were crushed under the weight of inherited hostility, for this was the era the Arabs would later call Jahiliyah, the age of ignorance, a time when polytheism reigned supreme. The Kaaba, built centuries earlier by Prophet Ibrahim and his son Ismail as a sanctuary for monotheistic worship, now teemed with hundreds of idols, each carved in stone or fashioned in bronze, representing a fractured pantheon, and around it swirled the commerce of Mecca, a city that had become a hub of caravans stretching from Yemen to Syria, where merchants traded frankincense, myrrh, silk, and precious metals, and where the Quraysh prospered, using their control of the Kaaba to elevate their own power, while beyond the city walls, the Bedouin tribes wandered the deserts, living by survival, navigating both the harsh climate and the intricate codes of tribal law, while social injustice pervaded every layer of society. Daughters were buried alive to avoid the shame of poverty or dishonor, women were treated as property, slaves labored under brutal conditions, and the poor were left without recourse, all under a system where might determined right. Yet amid this darkness, flashes of brilliance emerged, for the Arabs were masters of poetry, language, and oral history, and their eloquence carried not only entertainment but political influence, wisdom, and moral reflection, though even this art could not fully illuminate the spiritual void that pervaded their world. Into this complex and often harsh society, in the year of the elephant, around 570 CE, a child was born in Mecca who would come to change the course of history, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, son of Abdullah of the noble Banu Hashim clan, whose father had passed away before his birth, leaving him orphaned from the outset, and whose mother, Amina, died when he was only 6, thrusting the young boy into the precarious position of a child alone in a tribal society that valued lineage, loyalty, and protection above all else, under the guardianship first of his grandfather Abdul Muttalib, the venerable custodian of the Kaaba, and then his uncle Abu Talib. Muhammad grew in a world of stark contrasts, witnessing both the rigid structures of tribal life and the cruelty and injustice that ran rampant, tending flocks in the hills surrounding Mecca, learning patience and humility, and quietly observing human nature, absorbing lessons that would later inform his prophetic mission, while earning the reputation of Al-Amin, the trustworthy, a man whose word could be relied upon even in a society rife with deception, whose integrity became a beacon in a land overshadowed by moral darkness. As he matured, he entered the world of commerce, accompanying caravans to Syria, Yemen, and beyond, encountering diverse peoples, religions, and cultures, from Jews and Christians to remnants of monotheistic traditions, and through these interactions, he glimpsed a wider world, one governed by principles of trade, negotiation, and human dignity, yet still marred by inequality and spiritual blindness, and his unwavering honesty and acumen caught the attention of Khadija bint Khuwaylid, a wealthy, independent businesswoman renowned for her enterprise and wisdom, who entrusted him with her trade caravans, and later proposed marriage, forging a union that would become one of the most enduring partnerships in history, providing not only material stability but also unwavering moral and emotional support, allowing Muhammad to focus on deeper reflection and spiritual pursuit. Yet despite worldly success, he remained troubled by the idolatry, injustice, and moral decay surrounding him, retreating often to the solitude of the cave of Hira in the mountains above Mecca, seeking understanding and communion with the divine, until one fateful night, in the blessed month of Ramadan, at the age of 40, the quiet of the cave was pierced by the presence of the angel Jibreel, commanding him to read, a moment that would forever alter human history, initiating the revelation of the Quran, words of eternal guidance that would illuminate humanity's path, calling for the oneness of Allah, justice, compassion, and moral rectitude, a direct challenge to the entrenched practices of Meccan society and the idolatrous traditions that had held sway for generations. Initially preaching in secret, Muhammad gathered a small circle of devoted followers, including Abu Bakr, Ali, Khadija, and Bilal, men and women of unwavering faith who would endure persecution, economic sanctions, and social ostracization in the earliest days of Islam, facing brutal hostility from Quraysh leaders who saw in the message not only a threat to their wealth and power but a challenge to the very fabric of tribal society, and as tensions mounted, the believers were subjected to torture, imprisonment, and boycott, including the infamous social and economic embargo against the Banu Hashim, forcing them into the barren valley of Shib-Abi Talib, where hunger, thirst, and deprivation tested their resilience and faith. It was also a time of profound personal loss, as the Prophet endured the passing of his beloved wife Khadija and his protective uncle Abu Talib in what became known as the Year of Sorrow, moments that could have extinguished the human spirit but instead revealed an extraordinary depth of patience, fortitude, and trust in Allah, while simultaneously preparing the ground for miraculous interventions, such as the Isra and Miraj, spiritual journeys that confirmed his prophetic mission and strengthened the resolve of his followers. In parallel, the message of Islam, though born in the narrow streets of Mecca, began to transcend tribal boundaries, carried through the dedication of its followers, the ethical conduct of its prophet, and the unyielding appeal of a faith that promised equality, justice, and accountability, reaching even the slaves and marginalized of Meccan society, offering dignity and purpose previously denied to them. As opposition intensified, the Prophet received invitations from the leaders of Yathrib, a city troubled by tribal conflict and strife, seeking his arbitration and leadership, recognizing his unique ability to unite disparate groups under principles of justice and fairness. And in 622 CE, the Hijra, the migration from Mecca to Yathrib, later renamed Medina, marked not only a physical relocation but a monumental turning point in Islamic history, a moment that would inaugurate the Islamic calendar, establishing the first Islamic state, governed not by tribal dominance but by principles of law, equality, and civic responsibility. In Medina, Muhammad became not only a spiritual leader but a statesman, legislator, and military strategist, drafting the Constitution of Medina, which united Muslims, Jews, and other tribes under shared rights and responsibilities, embedding principles of mutual protection, religious freedom, and justice, transforming a fractured city into a cohesive, functioning society, while simultaneously managing tensions, forging alliances, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the Quraysh of Mecca, who would not relinquish power so easily. These years in Medina were marked by both trials and triumphs, as the nascent Muslim community faced the Battle of Badr, where divine support and strategic acumen turned the tide in favor of a smaller, outnumbered force, the Battle of Uhud, which taught the painful lessons of disobedience and resilience, and the Battle of the Trench, a masterclass in defensive strategy against overwhelming odds, all of which solidified the unity, discipline, and faith of the Muslim Ummah while demonstrating the moral, spiritual, and strategic dimensions of leadership exemplified. As the sands of Arabia shifted under the relentless sun, so too did the spiritual landscape of the peninsula, transformed by the unwavering message of Muhammad, whose risalat, the divine mission of prophethood, now rippled outward from the narrow streets of Mecca into every corner of Arabia, reshaping not only beliefs but the very fabric of society, as the early Muslims embraced a life defined by sacrifice, courage, and unwavering devotion, aware that their commitment to Tawhid, the oneness of Allah, would demand every ounce of faith and fortitude they could muster. From the earliest days, these believers faced relentless persecution, their loyalty tested through social ostracization, economic embargo, and physical torture, yet through these trials, the community's cohesion deepened, the bonds of brotherhood and shared purpose forming a spiritual armor far stronger than any weapon of the Quraysh, and as Islam's moral and ethical teachings spread, the core principles of justice, mercy, and accountability began to take root, challenging centuries-old traditions of tribal hierarchy, idolatry, and oppression, offering an unprecedented vision in which women, slaves, and the disenfranchised found dignity and protection under the law, a revolutionary concept in the context of 7th century Arabia. The Hijra, the migration to Medina, had established a new stage for this grand experiment in moral and societal reform, a city-state governed not by brute tribal loyalty but by covenant and law, where Muslims, Jews, and other residents were bound by mutual obligations, religious tolerance, and ethical conduct, forming a cohesive society that could withstand both internal and external pressures, and where Muhammad emerged as a statesman, judge, and military strategist, balancing mercy and justice in a manner unprecedented in human history, while guiding a fledgling community through the complex importance of courage and strategy. The Battle of Uhud, which brought devastating losses due to human error but provided lessons in obedience, patience, and perseverance, and the Battle of the Trench, a masterful defensive operation that showcased not only military acumen but also the ability to unify disparate groups under a common cause, illustrating that Islam's triumph relied as much on moral and strategic discipline as on faith itself. Throughout these trials, the message of Islam continued to spread beyond the immediate battlefield, carried through diplomacy, ethical conduct, and the example of a community transformed by principles rather than power. Emissaries were sent to neighboring tribes and rulers, letters dispatched to emperors and kings, and converts emerged not merely through coercion but through the profound appeal of a faith that offered justice, compassion, and a sense of purpose previously absent in the fractured world of Arabia, a message that resonated with traders, scholars, and the marginalized alike, creating a groundswell that would forever alter the socio-political landscape of the region. Central to this expansion were the extraordinary sacrifices of the early Muslims, whose devotion was tested in ways both mundane and extraordinary. Men and women relinquished wealth, social standing, and even life itself in the cause of preserving and spreading the truth of Islam, enduring exile, hunger, and persecution with steadfast faith, exemplifying the very principles of tawhid, justice, and moral responsibility that formed the core of the divine message, while inspiring countless others to embrace a life dedicated to higher purpose and moral rectitude. As the Prophet consolidated power in Medina, he also undertook efforts to unify the Arabian Peninsula through treaties, alliances, and strategic marriages, combining diplomacy with moral authority, ensuring that conflicts were resolved not only through force but through arbitration, dialogue, and the establishment of covenants grounded in justice and fairness, illustrating a revolutionary approach to governance and community organization. The culmination of these efforts came with the peaceful conquest of Mecca, a moment unparalleled in its combination of strategic brilliance, moral courage, and divine guidance, when Muhammad entered the city not as a conqueror seeking vengeance but as a liberator and moral reformer, purging the Kaaba of idols, forgiving his erstwhile enemies, and restoring the sanctuary to its original purpose as a center of monotheistic worship, a profound act of mercy that reverberated across Arabia and symbolized the collapse of Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance, paving the way for the universal acceptance of Islam throughout the peninsula. In the years that followed, Islam spread with remarkable speed, transcending tribal, linguistic, and cultural boundaries, not through coercion but through the compelling force of its ethical teachings, moral example, and the dedication of its followers, transforming a once fragmented and violent region into a unified community underpinned by shared belief, ethical governance, and devotion to the principles revealed to Muhammad. The farewell pilgrimage, during which the Prophet delivered his historic sermon, articulated principles that would resonate across civilizations for centuries to come: the equality of all humans regardless of race or lineage, the sanctity of life and property, the respect and rights of women, and the universality and completeness of the divine message, emphasizing that true power and lasting influence arise from justice, mercy, and adherence to moral principles, a revolutionary doctrine in both its spiritual and societal implications. Following the passing of Muhammad in 632 CE, the nascent Muslim community faced immense challenges: leadership transitions, internal dissent, and external threats. Yet guided by the principles he had established and the organizational structures he had put in place, the community persevered, expanding beyond Arabia with astonishing speed, establishing governance, jurisprudence, and centers of learning that would leave an indelible mark on human civilization, the Rashidun caliphs, particularly Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, carried forward the mantle of leadership, consolidating the Islamic State, ensuring justice, and expanding the reach of Islam into neighboring territories, from the Levant and Persia to North Africa, while maintaining fidelity to the ethical and spiritual framework established by the Prophet, demonstrating that political success and moral integrity need not be mutually exclusive. Over subsequent centuries, the Islamic world became a beacon of learning, culture, and scientific achievement, preserving and building upon the knowledge of previous civilizations, advancing fields such as medicine, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, and philosophy, while also establishing institutions that fostered education, social welfare, and intellectual inquiry, reflecting the holistic vision of Islam that encompasses both spiritual and worldly excellence, illustrating that the impact of Muhammad's message was not confined to faith alone but extended to the very advancement of human civilization. The enduring legacy of Islam is evident not only in the spiritual lives of over 1 billion Muslims today but also in the ongoing influence on law, ethics, governance, and intercultural engagement, shaping societies across continents, from the courts of Baghdad to the universities of Córdoba, the trade networks of Cairo to the cultural centers of Delhi, leaving an imprint that blends spiritual devotion with intellectual, social, and civic achievement, a testament to the transformative power of faith guided by justice and moral vision. Today, when Muslims turn toward Mecca in prayer, recite the Quran revealed in the cave of Hira, and strive to embody the ethical teachings exemplified by the Prophet, they are participating in a living continuum of